Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Southern Outdoorsman Podcast. Today, our studio looks a little bit different, and that is because we are all packed up. Just got done with the World Deer Expo. We had basically our whole studio over there, and now it's all packed up in a Jacob's truck where he's going to be going to Kalamazoo, Michigan for the Mobile Hunters Expo Northern Show. So, Jacob, how you doing?
Oh, doing well. Super excited. It's been so busy for us recently. Like probably 4 weeks ago, we had the Mobile Hunters Expo in Chattanooga, Tennessee, which was a fantastic show. Got to meet a bunch of listeners there. It was a great time hanging out with you all. Then, just this past weekend, literally like 4 days ago, we had the World Deer Expo in Birmingham, which was insane. Absolutely insane. I thought I had talked myself out just how much I talked at the Mobile Hunters Expo.
Yep.
As many listeners as we had to the World Deer Expo, it was crazy. And then, literally 4 days later, heading up to Michigan for the Northern show of the Mobile Hunters Expo, which is going to be an absolute blast. So it's going to be even bigger than the Southern show, which I can't even imagine how crazy it's going to be. We're another room full of killers, man. It's going to be a good time.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. So this past week, we had old Sonny Mcumpsey on from Arkansas. So we originally had Sonny on. Should have looked up the episode number. We always do this. Should have looked up the episode number, but we had him and Michael Baugh on a couple weeks ago. It was like early summer, wasn't it?
I'll find it real quick.
I don't know, man. Time's flying. This summer's going by really fast. But we had those guys on from Arkansas. Got a lot of good feedback, and like halfway through the interview, we're like, yeah, we need to get both of these guys on a show, like individually, and kind of pick apart their tactics, which we did do. So Michael's coming up in a couple weeks. But Sonny was really interesting because of the terrain he hunts, the style he hunts, and kind of going a little bit deeper on the style, like how he likes to basically scout his way into spots and stuff like that, and how much he moves around in the mountains, which that's something that we both found really interesting from his first episode, where he just kind of touched on it a little bit. He touched on, trail camera use up in the mountains. He touched on, like going and finding scrapes. He calls them pawns, and basically his entire thought process behind hunting that. So that was fun to pick that apart.
Yeah,
but what's that episode number?
So the episode originally when we had both Michael Baugh and Sonny Mcumpsey, who are cousins. That was episode 480, which is a really good episode. I'd highly recommend listening to that episode. Really before you listen to this week's episode with Sonny, and then we got Michael, his cousin, coming out in the next couple weeks as well.
Yep, sometime in August.
Both of them were just fantastic episodes, great interviews. But yeah, this episode, just be able to dive in more on some of Sonny's thoughts and tactics has been pretty crazy. But real quick before we dive into that, the studio does look really weird because it's so packed up. It looks kind of rough on camera, but appreciate it.
We were gonna set it all back up, but then I walked outside and you had everything like ratcheted into the back of your truck, and you were like, "All right, you ready to get this out?" I was like, "No, let's just throw the lawn chairs up."
Yeah, no.
Let's do what we can do.
Yep, but kind of going back into this week's episode with Sonny. It was interesting to be able to get this guy on who really, one of the biggest things that I really like about Sonny is he truly is a still hunter. It's almost like ground hunts first, and then if you find the right spot, then they bring the climber back in and set up a spot that you're going to maybe sit all day on later on. But, most of the time he's on the ground, especially during that muzzledeer season in Arkansas where he's at, hunting in the mountains. And just there are so many different things that he talked about, which is slightly different than what we hear with a lot of people. One thing that I want to kind of get your thoughts on, he kind of mentions a little bit later on the episode, but his thought process of not really slip hunting up on top of the ridge, but he's getting down in the major drainages and kind of watching back up each side of the ridge system in those mountains, which I was like, that was not what I was expecting. I was expecting, maybe get off the top third of the ridge where you kind of see down a good ways, but you could also kind of see up towards the top. But he's like, no, I really like to kind of stay low, and which is just different. I mean, it's so different. Like, you don't hear that from a lot of guys. Most guys are like, I want to get up high, I want to get up, higher elevation, a little more steady wind conditions. But no, he's just like, I'll get down low and freaking start cruising.
Yeah, that was interesting. I didn't expect him to say that at all. And I don't think we've heard anybody else say anything like that, right?
Not in his style of hunting. I mean, I think we've had guys on talking about hunting kind of lower in the drainages, like with a stand, but not slip hunting through those areas.
Yeah.
Where he's kind of like, he's kind of getting in a spot where like he can watch. And what he says, what makes a lot of sense is where he's at. It seems like these are pretty steep drainages. So, the people on YouTube kind of watching, they're steep enough drainages that when he's down kind of in the bottom, he can, like he said, he can look up 200-300 yards on each side of the ridge. And depending on the elevation, you're not going to see towards the top of the ridges. He's talking, some of these areas I'm sure he's hunting, it's probably on the lower side, probably 300 to 400 feet of elevation, and maybe on the upper side, 800 to maybe 900 feet of elevation change from the bottom to the top. So you're not seeing all the way to the top of the ridge. But if you think about it, if some of these areas specifically, if a lot of the pressure and axis maybe is from the top, this makes a lot of sense.
That's very true. I didn't think about that. What do you think about the thermals too? Because if you're down in like one of those really narrow little valleys and it's shaded during the day, your thermals are probably just going to be kind of sitting down there,
depending on the wind conditions.
That's true.
So if you're hunting,
if you're blocked from the wind for the most part.
Yeah, if you're right before a front hits and the wind speed's real high, you might have some pretty bad editing down there. But another thing he mentioned is, he's like, the wind does that all the time, but I'm constantly kind of easing my way up, and he's like, it's never blowing one direction for super long. So my goal is to get it visual and see far enough that scent's not traveling way out in front of me or over to the sides. If you can work with the wind in your face, but it's like at that time there's wind hitting you in the back. But the thought process is, and this is what was smart about it, with him being that low, he's like, the wind hits me in the back of the head, it's going to go up the drainage, but I can see up each side of the ridge. I can see up to the left-hand side, I can see up to the right-hand side, where probably my scent's not at. But my scent's out in front of me, but I'm not trying to kill a deer in front of me down low. I'm trying to kill the buck running that ridge line to my side. And I'm like, okay, now you're talking. That's like another level of kind of like thought process when it comes to like hunting that kind of stuff. And I was like, okay, now that kind of makes a little bit of sense. Now, in addition to that, you're talking about the being in the shade and following thermals. If you're hunting one of those days where it's like light and variable conditions, the exact same conditions that one of our past guests, Rusty Johnson, talks about, loves hunting. He loves hunting those ditches. He hunts the head of those ditches in Arkansas, kind of a little bit higher up, but he likes to hunt them on light and variable days. And for whatever reason, light and variable days where like there's no, wind speeds under 2 miles an hour, you don't necessarily know what the wind's going to do, but it seems like those bucks are cruising real high, trying to catch those rising thermals on, especially those sunny slopes, the southern-facing slopes, east-facing slopes in the afternoon, those west-facing slopes. But if he's down low like this, there's going to be a certain point, like you said, with the, whether it's overcast conditions, which would be awesome for cruising down low, for him to be down low, and also the bucks to be a little bit lower. Or, again, if it's sunny, but he's able, sunny and sunny. If it's bright outside and it's a little more shaded down there, like you said, as long as there's not a lot of wind, his thermals are going to stay down low. But even without that, even with a little bit of swirling wind, like what he's talking about, he's like, I don't think my wind's necessarily running up the ridge a whole bunch. It's going up and down the drainage back and forth, which is fine because I'm not expecting the bucks to be in the drainage. I think they're going to be up one hillside or the other.
Yep.
And I'm like, oh, dude, that's
kind of get your wheels turning a little bit.
You could go deep on that.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it's all about getting that visual advantage too, I guess. Like he's putting himself in a spot where he can see and actually use like his gun to his advantage, I guess.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was very interesting. You don't hear that very often.
No.
And it makes me really curious about what his woods look like, because I was kind of thinking about doing like some of the woods that we've hunted and how you'd make that work, and I don't think we have like big enough terrain, at least around here, to make that work. Like I feel like you got to have pretty big terrain and a certain kind of woods.
Yeah,
too.
yeah. I mean, a lot of hardwoods, it'd be hard to deal unless it was really mature pines, because you need open woods. Like you don't need crazy thing. It'd be hard to do that anywhere with a bunch of pines, especially that's been thinned and select cut. But if you're in an area, like I was thinking parts of North Georgia, maybe North Alabama, especially Eastern Tennessee, North Carolina, maybe upstate of South Carolina, and some of that real kind of more mountainous stuff.
Yep. Like true mountains.
Yeah,
like
that's where. Yeah, that's where I think this would be a factor. Like I think you need to have kind of the number comes to mind. I think you need to have 400 to 500 feet of elevation change from the bottoms to the top for that to really work good. Because if it's like 150 feet of elevation change, like stuff we may see here or parts of Tennessee, or
You're going to be like, they're going to be right on top of you.
Yeah, well, they're going to be on top of you. And if that wind swirls, it can make it up that ridge.
Yeah.
Versus if you're like 500-600 feet of elevation, unless that wind is hitting, like rolling over the top of one ridge, like you're walking in, say like you're walking that bottom to the north, and each ridge runs north to south next to you. If you have like an east wind, this is going to eddy. It's going to swirl, and it's going to be like a whirlwind. But if you're working kind of north with like a quartering wind into your face, or even if it's at your back, there's a good chance if it's open enough woods on the side of those ridges to potentially be able to look up to the left and right and catch those bucks cruising and potentially not bust you.
Yeah. Also, he's like a true still hunter, and there's a lot of confusion around the term still hunting too. And this is something that we got a little bit with Daniel Lemon's episode talking about still hunting, because we covered a little bit of that on his episode as well. But still hunting is not where you're just standing still, right?
Yeah, you should call it slip hunting.
Yeah. That's what a lot of people down here actually do call it, is slip hunting. Mm-hmm. So you're out slip hunting.
And if you're going squirrel hunting without a dog, you're slip hunting.
You're slip hunting. You're just slipping.
What's Mr. Benny call it?
Slip hunting.
Yeah.
Yep. That's what he calls it. Going out and slip hunting. But you gotta, I think it's also a testament to how slow he's going. Because if you really think about it, like put yourself mentally right there in that valley, and you're easing down that valley, watching up both sides. Think about how slow you'd have to actually be going to catch a buck above you walking where he doesn't notice you and you notice him. Think about how slow you have to be going.
Or in Sonny's case, a lot of times, sometimes they do see you, they catch a little bit of move, but they don't necessarily know what it was. Mm-hmm. And also, I think advantage of being down low is slightly more shadows to potentially kind of work with.
Yeah. Versus
being up on an exposed ridge line doing this or hillside.
Definitely not getting skylined.
Definitely not getting skyline for sure. And he talked about having, good camouflage, which could play a huge part in this, just kind of slipping through. But, even if they bump them, it kind of goes into another point of, like, the calling aspect, which to me is what gets me super excited about this conversation. I think the most exciting thing about this conversation was his thought process on if he runs into some deer, whether he thinks it's just a group of does, whether he thinks he saw a buck or for sure he saw a buck, if they kind of start easing off or running off, he's doing that crazy call thing. He's kicking the ground, kicking leaves up, shaking saplings, grunting like it's a buck in there, like an aggressive buck that potentially bumped these other deer off, and maybe that commotion maybe doesn't bring that specific buck back, but like he had mentioned, he's like, I don't know if I'm calling the same buck back or if there's another buck in the air that slips down. But typically, if he does that and he's in the right spot, within 3 to 5 minutes, he's having that buck or another buck come slipping in, checking out what's going on, and that's when he gets a shot.
Yeah, I found that super interesting, and like I said on the episode with him, a lot of times when you run into those deer, there's more deer around, and so you might call in a totally different deer, and you're almost using the deer that are like running around and causing a commotion as a call in and of itself. Yeah, that's slick. Yeah, I like that.
That's your ground noise for you.
Yep.
I mean, but that's the advantage of what he was talking about with slip hunting or still hunting, as other people would call it. Is you're on the ground, so you can make the ground noise you can't make when calling in a tree stand or in a saddle when you're elevated. Like the kicking the leaves, and it's kind of funny how you brought the whole story how you broke your toe kicking that stump.
Dude, my toe ain't ever been the same. No. It's still kind of crooked. It still kind of hurts.
I think we should have just amputated it.
Probably. Well, I don't know. I heard that if you lose your big toe, you can't stand right or whatever. It screws up your balance. Dude, man, when I kicked that thing for real, I hit the ground like a sniper shot me. I mean, dude, I went down, bro. It was bad.
Was I hunting out there the same day?
Yeah, that was the day. It was raining. You were out there in your waders and your freaking.
That day sucked.
Yep.
So bad.
Well, it sucked worse for me.
Well, yeah, it did suck worse for you. But yeah, I was hunting opening day gun season in Alabama. You were going through some ponds. I was slipping through some other ponds. Kind of like what he was talking about. Kind of what Sonny was talking about. We're in mountainous terrain, but gentle rolling hill terrain, and we were slipping through some ponds that traditionally we wouldn't hunt, but there's deer sign there, and we were thinking.
And we had talked to some guys who'd seen some bucks cruising through those ponds.
Yeah, absolutely.
Even though they're open ponds, they're open underneath. At the time they're a lot bigger now. But at the time they're open underneath. They're big enough to get a saddle in, like if you wanted to climb like 8 feet.
Yeah.
It's in that weird stage where there's kind of like nothing going on in there. But the bucks are still cruising through there because there was some major terrain features that are kind of funneling through. Me and JT threw a camera out, and I checked it with him. He had a couple daylight walkers, like nice deer in there.
Yeah, and that's the thing, not to get sidetracked with the conversation about Sonny, but that's the thing about some of that habitat. Even though that area doesn't have, like, especially when we hunt it, it looks totally different now, because this is probably 4 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago.
It was right before I got married.
Yeah,
because we were going on my bachelor trip.
Oh yeah,
that night.
And
I was upset because we were going not hunting on my bachelor trip.
I
was like, come on, guys, we could have planned this better.
Well, listen, I was trying to do this deep sea fishing trip, and the other guys didn't want to do it, Colton. So,
anyway.
God. But yeah, dude, we went to Biloxi, Mississippi, went to the Hard Rock Cafe and
Casino. Not my scene at all.
Yeah, Hard Rock Hotel, well, not cafe, Hard Rock Hotel and the casino. It was a fun time, guys. Yeah, Andrew's not in his environment, but it was an absolute blast.
I was like a fish out of water.
But my dude, we were right there at the beach. Like, dude, we could have gone on a charter trip or something, but no, the guys didn't want to do it, man.
Yeah, I would have went fishing. I wouldn't have been. Yeah, I mean, fishing would have been fun.
But yeah, I just remember you hobbling. We were down at the casino, and Andrew's hobbling around. He's looking like he needs a walker.
Dude, it hurts. There was old women in that casino getting around better than me.
Yeah.
Like, for real. You know, like, there's all the old ladies playing, like, the penny slots.
Oh, yeah. They
smoking cigarettes.
Had their big old plastic cup full of pennies, dude, and they're walking around shaking them like, oh yeah, we cashed out, baby.
Oh, my gosh.
But, no, kind of going back into this hunt, though, this is a really good point. Kind of going where, like, Sonny's talking about, like, these open woods. Like, in certain areas, bucks will go through open woods, but the open woods, it seems like, in my opinion, maybe get your thought on this, is the open woods that people don't hunt. When some people think of open woods, they think of hardwoods, like those pretty hardwood bottoms, like what Glenn Solomon talked about in episode 116. You know, don't hunt those pretty bottoms. I agree, but another type of open woods that we have down here in the southeast that's almost unhuntable because guys can't take tree stands in there, and some guys just aren't going to sit on the ground, is those pines that are in that age range of, say, 10 to 15 years old. Mm-hmm. That age range where, like, yeah, you could get a lock on in it. You can't get a climber in that stuff. You can get a lock on in some of those trees. You can get a saddle in it. You can get up 8-10 feet.
Yeah.
But there's so many limbs. It's like there's so many limbs you can't really hunt out of it because if you climb more than like 8 feet, you can't see anything. But if you're at 8 feet, you're completely exposed.
Yep.
But there's those areas always have a ton of sign, and you think it's nighttime sign, and then you find out, you start talking to some guys, and I know there's a listener to the podcast right now, probably watching this YouTube video, who I know for sure has shot, and I think he might have killed, but I know he shot, and I don't think he recovered a big buck at this exact same spot we're talking about.
Yeah.
Exact same spot.
Yep.
And he was slip hunting through these pines.
Yep.
Clear bluebird day. I think it was clear, clear skies. And happened to catch one of these cruising bucks coming through these wide open pines. But the thing about this area is, since it's not easy to get tree stands in, you can't really hunt with tree stands. Some guys will pass through it, going to like an SMZ, like a creek bottom or something like that. But they're not hunting in there, and the bucks feel comfortable cruising through that general area. Okay, which again is open woods. I mean, some of that stuff you could see 200 yards in probably if you get in the right spot.
If you sit on the ground, I don't know, 200 might be stretching it. In some
you could see
spots,
up to other hillsides.
Like, yeah, you could see the other hillside if you sat on the ground. But if you got in your saddle and you got 8 feet up, you wouldn't be able to see but like 20 yards.
Yeah, because I tried that before, and like I could see a little bit further than that because I got on a little hilltop. But like I could see maybe 80 yards. Mm-hmm. But like if you would have sat on the ground, you could see 140 yards probably.
Yeah, because it's like that in the stages. Like something gets clear cut, and it's like pretty open ground for a year. There might be some sage grass and stuff out there, and then it gets a little bit thicker year 2, a little bit thicker year 3, year 4. Your pines are starting to creep up. You know, they're starting to get some size to them. Year 5 and 6, those pines are getting big enough to where now it's getting kind of hard to gun hunt that cutover. You know,
you really can't at that age.
Yeah.
It's super hard.
Depends on the site, but yeah, like they're getting big enough where there's only going to be little holes that you can see stuff in.
Yeah.
And then from like, I don't know, like 5 to like 8-ish years, then it just turns into like a good bedding area. You can hunt the edges of it.
Yeah, that's a pine. That's what we like when I think of like a legit pine thicket. That's one of the first things that come to mind is that like I said, 5 to 8, 9 years old.
Yeah.
You know, again, depends on where you're at, but especially around us, we're like, you're not really getting in there, or if you can, like, I don't know how well you can do. I know Mike Black's been on the podcast. He's talked about, getting opportunities and some stuff like that off the ground.
Yeah, I mean, I've run cameras in there, and if you could hunt it, you'd have some opportunities.
But you're talking like 7-8 yards
honestly, the perfect way to hunt that would be find a spot where you can get a little bit of distance, like 15 yards off of whatever like trail intersection or whatever you're going to be watching inside the thicket. Put a scrape there and hunt it with one of those like see-through blinds. What is it, like the Primos?
Yeah. Like
what's it called?
Oh, what is that stuff called?
I don't know, but it's like the blind. It's like the 360 blind that you get in,
blind.
And it's a pop-up blind. But you can. It's like one-way mesh, so you can see out of it 360 around you. But from the outside, it just looks like a pop-up blind.
Yeah.
And get that in there, dude. That would.
And speak about
slay.
Another guest topic that would work in there, especially if you're in a club where you can trim some stuff. Use Richard Mannery's tactic, which is, I need to look at this, but Richard Mannery, who was on the podcast back in January or back in the springtime, that's a guy, guys, you need to go back and listen to this episode if I can find the episode number. He's talking about not necessarily doing this with ground blinds, but getting in those pines that typically like you can't hunt in, and he's finding like a single, whether it's an oak, a lot bigger pine, there's something there that he can get a tree stand in, or actually now he's using a saddle one sticking, and climbing that stuff, find a tree you can climb in, and then cut a shooting lane where you're just trimming off those branches, going out for like 60 to 80 yards out, almost making a path that the deer can follow towards your stand. Stop it just before your stand, like 10 yards out, and it kind of make it veer around the stand, but it gives you an opportunity for a deer to hit that walkway, that path, and come to you. But you can do the same thing with the pop-up blind as well. And he talked about that. He's like, if you want to use pop-up blind, that would probably work really good in that same situation on a club or private land where you can go through and trim, like legit trim the branches, where you can make a path that's, a row wide or so, where you trim maybe like pines or limbs on each side of the pine tree as it kind of goes out, and you got, like a 6 to 8 foot wide opening that runs out 50, 60 yards, and give you an opportunity to catch those deer kind of easing through there, and it'd be a great place to put a mock scrape at too.
Yeah, definitely.
But where I'm kind of getting at this, let's see, how do you spell Manry?
Manry. Manry. No, but that would be, so that, in that, like time period, like that 6 to 9 years, so that's when it's like good bedding and it's going to be like slam full of deer.
Yeah.
Then like 10 years plus, it starts kind of shading out.
And that's when they start bedding. They'll still use it, but it's like summer bedding.
Yeah.
Bed in the shade, because that's where I've jumped a lot of bachelor groups.
Yep.
And then also come season, even in those older pines, when you start get that 10 to 12 year range, it's maybe not thick in them, unless you find an area that's like dead, like maybe like the trees didn't grow well, you got a glade there, you've got something there that like didn't allow the trees to grow, and you have a thick spot in the middle of it. Or the other thick cover is like if you have like the tip of an SMZ, like a drainage that comes up into it and stops.
Oh yeah.
And the trees can't grow there very well. That spot, you could find a really thick spot that a buck could bed at or some does could bed at.
Yep.
Just on the adjacent, just next to those open pines, but they're not actually in the pines itself.
Yeah. And then that's when it becomes that stage of pines where people can't climb in it. Nobody's putting like ladder stands or stuff like that in it. And it's just kind of like the open woods that people don't hunt, like you were talking about earlier.
It's the stuff that Glenn Solomon talked about in episode 116. Again, we mention this episode all the time, guys, where you can... He talked about going into some of these pine spots, just like what we're talking about, but he's carrying a bar stool in with him, where you'll have like some sage grass and stuff growing up, or broom sedge. I keep saying sage, but it's broom sedge, growing underneath it, which is a type of sedge grass, and he'll get like 2.5, 3 feet high, sitting on his bar stool up against a tree, where you can see over that grass, but he's still underneath the limb canopy.
Yep.
So you can still see out from there and be able to get shot opportunities, whether it's with a bow, whether it's with a rifle, muzzler, doesn't matter. But real quick, Richard Mannery's episode, which is a must-listen-to episode, especially, guys, if you're hunting clubs, leases, family farms, and private land where you can do some stuff on. That's episode 464, Hunting Big Flatland Whitetails with Richard Mannery. He's from Alabama, and his success on clubs and leases is tremendous, especially in areas with a lot of pines. And that's an episode, guys, is a must-listen-to episode, in episode 464. But using that in some of these areas would work. But where I'm kind of getting back at, and kind of we've talked around it a little bit, with those open pines, those 10 to 12, almost 15 years old pines, depending on where you're at, is an excellent spot to go slip hunt through, in my opinion, down here in the southeast, especially on those rainy, drizzly days.
Yep.
Like, especially if you have an area that's like, 100 plus acres of that stuff that you can really kind of ease yourself through. It doesn't even have to be that big, but if it's if it's a 100-acre spot, that's pretty awesome. If it's 50 acres, it's pretty awesome. 20 acres, that's great. 10 acres, you can do it. But go super slow and work your way through that stuff and start looking for scrapes while you're going through. Look for rubs. You're going to find rubs and you're going to find scrapes in that stuff. I guarantee you will. And you can start putting your Onyx, put your tracker on Onyx so you know exactly where you walked. And drop pins when you find all that sign. If you find that hot sign, especially some scrapes that maybe, like a huge scrape that, it's rained, there's some leaves in it or some pine straw in it, and they haven't worked it, get off that sucker 40, 50 yards. If you can see it, set up for a little bit and sit on the ground. Whether you're bow hunting or rifle hunting, I think you could have success bow hunting if you get in the right spot. I just got, so one of our buddies, Pat Newcomb from Newcomb Blind, he gave me one of his blinds to use for this year, and I'm going to use it in one of these spots like that, both bow hunting and gun hunting, whereas that pine trees that if you sit on the ground, there's not a lot of cover, but you pop that little blind right in front of you. It's a little like A-frame little blind that sits right in front of you guys, and use it. I think it would work absolutely fantastic in that application.
Yeah, it's perfect for that kind of thing, honestly. That right there is like my favorite. That was probably my favorite subject of the episode with Sonny, was talking about walking your way in, finding that hot sign, and being like, okay, and backing off and hunting it right then and there, like till dark. Because that is one thing. I don't remember who the first person was that actually brought that up on the podcast, but I don't think there's another single tactic that like worked for me as fast as that did. Like where someone on Monday or whenever we interviewed him was like, hey, this is what I like to do, and then like Saturday I go out and it just freaking works, because you're scouting and hunting at the same time, and you're not wasting any time. You're walking until you find what the good stuff is, and that's also a really good way to gauge what the good stuff in your area is, because like eventually you're gonna find what you need to be hunting, and sometimes you hunt it, sometimes you keep going thinking you're gonna find something better, but you'll learn pretty quick like what the good stuff is.
Yeah.
But that also goes into your first time in is your best time in. And
Glenn Solomon, episode 116.
We just quoting the heck out of it today. But first time in is the best time in, and you're walking in, you found that like where the deer just were, and you're like, they're still here, and then you back off and you hunt it, and a lot of times it works out. And
another thing, get one of those spots, even if it's kind of open woods, and I'm talking, this is now rifle hunting, not the bow or the rifle. If you can, if you find one of those spots where you have 2 or 3 huge scrapes and bunches of big looking branches, maybe some big rubs close by too, and you're like, dude, this is hot, and like maybe like it's in one of these pine, like again, an example down here for the guys in the deep south, one of these 12-year-old pine kind of thickets where like you can still walk through it. Like there'll be patches of briars, but there's not a lot of briars, a lot of pine straw. You can kind of ease your way through it. Like you're not really brushed up against a whole bunch of stuff. If you find that, and there are spots that come to mind right now where I know it's exactly like this, and you find where there's always some big scrapes in there, if I was going to call anything like that, I'd back up 60, 80 yards, as far back as you can get where you can still see that sign, and set up on the ground. Use your little blind, brush yourself in, sit against some trees, sit against a little backdrop, a little ridge, a little hillside, whatever, and do some calling there. Make some ground noise. Now, it's hard to make ground noise in pine straw. It really is.
Yeah.
But breaking sticks, like not trying to be quiet, breaking sticks almost like you're making a big licking branch or something like that, like you're working a tree.
Grab a tree and shake it.
Do some grunts. Maybe not rattle. You can rattle some. You can listen to Richard Fott's episode about rattling, but definitely doing some grunts and keeping your eyes freaking peeled. Paying attention, watching for movement. I think there's a really good chance you catch a buck slipping downwind of that, especially you get the wind in your face, and giving you a great shot opportunity with a gun, muzzler, or maybe even a bow. I mean, maybe. I mean, a lot of you guys listen to the podcast, a lot better bow hunter than I am, so you might be able to have success doing that. But I think that would work really well because, again, it's an area, to give y'all some more reference, there's not any hunting pressure because nobody's comfortable walking to those pines and sitting on the ground, especially during bow season or even come gun season. They want to sit on a power line. They want to sit on an open, field. They want to sit on a big creek bottom, something where they can see for a long ways, or a big clear cut.
Yeah.
But if you can find that, you get away from the hunting pressure, and those deer are used to having other bucks in that area. So when they hear that sound, I feel like we're going to have somebody that could have success using that this fall.
Yeah, I agree. It's a great tactic. And that actually reminds me of a place on the club that I marked last year. I've known about it for over a year now. And I think I've briefly walked through there one time, and it's that kind of stuff. It's pines that are open underneath.
Were we turkey hunted and got on the bird in the knife edge ridges?
Where did we get on the bird?
Last time?
No.
Oh, okay. That
Not
place,
there.
that would work really good there, though.
That I'm going to have some cameras right there.
But it's that kind of pines. Like, those pines are probably 14, 15 years old.
Yeah, there's another spot that actually is like that. You remember where I had that camera right next to the road and I had those dogs chasing a big buck by it?
Yeah.
Those pines. And if you go down in there, there's a major hub. Okay, so there's like a major hub that comes up, and dude, there's like 4 different hubs that kind of all come together right there, and you can get in the bottom of this one hub and you're watching it, and then but one of the offshoots that comes off of this thermal hub runs up into another thermal hub that just connects like so many. There's like 5 saddles right there, and they all dump into that one spot. And I think I'm going to go in there to the lower hub and cut like a really good shooting lane all the way up that bottom so I can see all the way up. It's like 150 yards into that other hub and be hunting that because it's the same kind of pines. Like, you can't really get in them. You'll have no advantage like getting up in a tree in there whatsoever because it's really a rifle spot. If you found a spot to bow hunt, which I really wouldn't bow hunt in there, you could get in a tree, but for rifle hunting, it doesn't make any sense. And I'm like salivating.
And nobody else in
that
club's going to do that.
Nobody else is going to be.
They're going to set the food plot below it. And
there is a food plot below it. Yeah, you know exactly where I'm talking
Yeah.
about. And that food plot is hunted. There's a nice SMZ down there. It's got white oaks, persimmons, everything. So I was salivating over that spot like yesterday or whenever because I need to go out there. I still got cameras out there. I got to go get those cameras and start moving them around. But for a rut spot, dude, I'm pretty excited about that spot.
But again, that's why I bring this up about what Sonny talked about slip hunting, is you can definitely do this in the southeast, even in areas with pines. It's just you got to find the right area to do it in and the right kind of habitat. It could be completely flat land, but especially if you have a little bit of rolling topography, like there's a 50 to 60 foot elevation change.
Yeah,
not necessarily in the pines, but in the general area where it drops down to the creek. I think this would work really well in those kind of pines, slipping through those pines. Well, again, you can take a bow with you. You can take a rifle muzzle or whatever.
bro, do it in squirrel season, man.
Yeah, you can't catch those squirrels and that stuff. What are you talking about?
Like, I'm talking about like practicing your slip hunting and stuff.
Oh, okay. Well, talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I had a guy at the Deer Expo this weekend that came up and he said that he started squirrel hunting a whole bunch and how much it helped him. And I was like, I need to get you on the podcast. We might have interviewed him. I can't remember. We got an episode coming out from the Deer Expo, but dude, there's no better way. There's no better way to sharpen those still hunting skills because you're like, if you just go out and start doing it cold turkey, like you're probably gonna suck at it, and you don't want to go out there and screw it up on a big buck. And most people's squirrel season opens well in advance of deer season, so go out squirrel hunting, man, and hone those still hunting skills because it's gonna teach you how to slip through the woods quietly. It's gonna teach you what kind of stuff spooks game, i.e. like don't bump into saplings. That's like a huge one that I learned like at a very young age, out slip hunting around for squirrels by myself, is like if I'm putting a stalk on a squirrel and I bump into a sapling, like he's gone because it's just like a flag waving,
shaking, making noise.
And like that can be seen way off through the woods. Like, it doesn't have to be a squirrel up in a tree, but like how to pick up movement with your eyes through the woods, because like I don't even know how many deer I've walked up on slip hunting for squirrels.
Yeah. Also, by the way, we did an episode on this.
Yes.
With Travis Murray.
Yes,
so
we did.
There's an episode on this exact topic we're talking about with Andrew, talking about like the value of squirrel hunting and learning woodsmanship and slip hunting and how it directly will apply to whitetail hunting. And that was with Travis Murray, one of the most popular guests we've had on the podcast. That actually came out last year in 2022. It's episode 398, Becoming a True Woodsman with Travis Murray. And he talks about this. His first passion was squirrel hunting growing up. And that directly applied to how he was able to learn to slip hunt on the ground and actually have success shooting his bow and killing bucks off the ground with his bow in the Deep South, specifically in Mississippi. So that's something definitely worth paying attention to and looking at, and maybe, like you said, going out there and applying that. Plus, it teaches you some marksmanship skills, especially if you're hunting with a 22 and trying to do headshots.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Definitely. You want to talk about the Deer Expo a little bit?
Well, actually, before we do that, let's see. Okay, yeah, before we do that, also going back to Sonny's episode, one other thing I was going to mention, like the calling off the ground, and like these ponds we're talking about. Now, I've mentioned this a couple times on the podcast, but I want to mention the same story again. There was a situation, the same spot I'm thinking of, where there's a huge community scrape in these. I don't know how old the ponds are now. They're probably at that 11. They're probably 12 years old right now. 11, 12 years old. But there is a huge community scrape out in these ponds on a water oak sapling. Water oak, at the time when I found it, was probably maybe slightly smaller than my wrist in size. And I've told the story before, but I found this community scrape as I was kind of just easing through, slip hunting with my bow, going to go just check these ponds. I was kind of walking around before a gun hunt, a few days before, just kind of, look and see what it looked like, because I hadn't been in this area in a while. When I found this community scrape, there were so many rubs going to it, and they had 5 intersecting trails all coming to this community scrape. And it was like this little opening inside these ponds where it's like, I'm not saying opening, slightly less canopy cover. You had some of that sedge, that broom sedge growing around this area, 20-yard gap. And I got there, and it had been freshly worked. Huge scrape, giant scrape, big looking branches. And I was messing with it. I was messing with the water oak because I was trying to bend some bigger branches down and give them some more licking branches because I only had one sitting there. And as I'm doing it, it's calm, 0 wind, high pressure day, sun's coming through, just a rising thermal, ripping thermal going up through these ponds. It was real cool that morning. I had it warmed up by this time. It was probably 9:30 in the morning. And originally I had actually set up on the ground bow hunting.
Is this over by the bus stop?
Yes.
Okay. Gotcha.
Yes, it is. So I originally was hunting in these ponds that morning because I knew there was a couple of scrapes close to the road section of this piece of public. Where they were kind of parallel on the road. So I sat there, didn't see anything that morning up until like 9:30. I was like, man, I'm gonna move. I'm gonna get in here. And as I was walking, I was just following the trails. And again, there's scrapes everywhere, rubs everywhere, but it was kind of sporadic. Got to that spot where all these trails came together and found the scrape. Long story short, I was messing with one of these branches. And I was reaching up, grabbing a big branch. And I was pulling it down, and I'm making all kinds of racket. It's kind of cracking and popping, and just
you sound like a big old buck.
There's leaves on the tree still, and this is kind of this would be that late pre-rut time frame. Still pre-rut, but late pre-rut. And I was reaching up there, and I was like, it was almost like I was shaking this branch. I was trying to bend it down. I finally was getting bent down, and I barely get bent in position, and all I hear is just this freaking running. Coming right at me. Okay, and I've told this on the podcast.
Who's on my scrape?
Yeah, I've told this on the podcast before. And I'm like, holy crap. And I was like, dude, there's a deer coming at me. So I spin around, and it was coming directly behind me in a direction I hadn't come from. I had my back to this spot, kind of where there's the elevation kind of dropped down into like, not really an SMZ, but like a little thicker bottom in these pines. And I drop down to a knee and knock an arrow as this deer's running towards me, and all I see is legs and hoofs running through the pines because I can't see anything above barely the brisket on this deer. It gets into probably 25 yards and stops, and at this point I'm fully drawn back because I'm like, I can't shoot this thing unless it gets like 15 yards or less. Yeah. Because I couldn't see in this one spot, and it stops. I catch a bit ahead, and I'm like, what? I'm like, it's got to be a buck. And at that point, I guess it could see me clearly, probably, like kind of like kneeling down next to the scrape because I had no chance to get to a tree or any kind of cover. And it blows, deep blow turns, and when it runs off, I can see I'm like on the ground kneeling because I wasn't kneeling right when I was running, and it kind of got down later. And I can see bases, and I can see like big bases on the deer, but I couldn't see brow tines or anything else like that. I could see just the base of his antlers. As he turned and ran off, I'm like, son of a gun, dude. And long story short, I found a tree. I got in there with a lock on, kind of hunting around that scrape, and didn't have any success there. But it was just that subtle noise of me definitely sounding like a buck working that scrape, throwing his antlers up and really working that licking branch and just knocking leaves around. Got him fired up and ran into that spot. And more than likely, that buck had worked that scrape that morning. Had a big paw print. Hoof print in it, and probably went back to bed, and he probably wasn't bedded more than probably 50 yards from me when he turned to run in. And it was a good lesson for me. I'm like, the deer are in these pines. It's hard to see the sign other than buck sign. It's hard to see tracks in pines because of all the pine straw. Yeah, you can see droppings. You can see rubs and scrapes in it, but you don't get to see the tracks, and that's something that we always try to key in on, except in those scrapes. It's the only place you can see them. And that was just such a big lesson. That's one of those spots, especially going to this season. We get the right conditions, some wind, or even one of those calm days. I'll probably go slipping some of that stuff. Yeah, and maybe it's not like a big enough area I can really slip around a whole bunch in. Like I'm not walking crazy like a lot in this area, but I can set up in some of those spots where traditionally the last few years I've always found these big scrapes at, and just hold tight and just try to catch a buck slipping through some of that stuff and doing some calling in.
Yeah, that's exciting. You could potentially kill a really big deer right there.
Mm-hmm.
Really big deer. That's a spot that us and some other people we know have had a lot of history with, like when it comes to big deer. Like several different groups of people too, like different groups of hunters that we know. That's kind of interesting. By the way, we talked about that scouting trip last time, right?
Mm-hmm.
We found the camera.
Mm-hmm.
We found out that camera belonged to none other than Scott Seals.
The man himself has Andrew's britches in one of his photos, which is hilarious.
Oh, that is funny, man.
Yep.
Y'all were talking about it at the show, right?
Yeah. We talked about it at the World Deer Expo, and because I hadn't sent it, I told him I was going to send an Onyx pin of where we're at, but I'm like, man, I'm going to see him this weekend. I'll show him when we get there. And we start talking, describing it. He's like, where were you at again? And I was like, yeah, here, came down this road, dropped into this and bottom, blah, 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 blah. He's like, man, I got some cameras in that area. I'm like, really? I'm like, we walked right by a camera. He's like, hold on a second. He's like, what were y'all wearing? I'm like, I kind of told him what I was wearing, what you were wearing. You had brown pants. I was like, I think I got Andrew on camera. I'm like, he's in that creek bottom right there by those big water oaks, and you got like a little like saddle coming out of it. He's like, oh yeah. I'm like, oh yeah, we were right. We walked right past. And I'm like, hey dude, I told him at the show. I was like, man, we found 2 mega buck beds, not 150 yards from there, back up another SMZ. He's like, I had 2 real big deer in there last year. He's like, it might be them. I'm like, all right, cool.
Okay.
Yeah,
that spot, it was funny because there were so many tracks right there. I was like, God, this spot's so awesome. And I'm standing there looking at all these tracks, found another scrape, and I look up and there's a camera like 8 feet in front of me. I was like, crap.
Yep. So, which is hilarious, but yeah, so Scott Seals camera.
Oh, Scott, great minds think alike.
Yeah, getting in there, man. I was like,
Scott, you done told us too much, man.
No.
We're finding your spots.
No, dude, it's kind of hilarious. He's like, we started talking about it. He's like, oh yeah, he's like, I got a camera there. I got a camera. I'm like, damn, bro. I'm like, everything I'm looking at, you're looking at too. I'm like, that's hilarious. But it's cool because the thing is like, we're taking like what we're learning from Scott, and clearly we hunt a lot of the same areas anyways. But just kind of putting the pieces together, but putting the pieces together for ourselves of like where to try to find some of these bucks.
Yeah.
After like having them on the podcast a bunch of times and actually seeing some of these spots, I'm like, okay, this makes more sense now. Mm-hmm. Like I can see how I can take like what I've learned and apply it to other areas and potentially try to get into some of the same stuff, like hunting those feed trees, hunting those SMZs, going up in those clear cuts and everything else.
Yeah, man, and Scott's such a good guy too. Like he's like always willing to share. It was a blast having him at the expo, by the way. He was in the booth for a while.
Speak about the expo.
Yeah, man. We had him and Shane Parker come by, and they had badges and everything. They hung out in the booth for a long time, dude. There were some guys there that I talked to who were like thrilled to meet Scott.
Yeah.
And Scott looked like he had some fun, man, talking to people. Like it was crazy, dude. Like those guys, they stayed pretty tied up, like talking to people just like we did. So it was kind of neat having them in the booth and guys coming by and they're like. And I'm like, hey, this is my buddy Scott Seals, and they're like, you're Scott from the podcast, and they'll like, and then them and Scott will talk for like 25 minutes.
That's awesome.
Just about all kinds of stuff.
Dude, I'll tell you what was hilarious too. So, also at the show was Daniel Lemon and I almost said Daniel Williams, who was at the show too, our taxidermist from Cedar Ridge Chronicles, but Daniel Lemon and Jeremy Aaron from Do It Yourself Hunter was at the expo. They had a booth couple rows over from us. But, dude, there was a point on Saturday, Daniel was just hanging out in our booth, and I swear, him and Shane
they hit it off.
We're burning down the freaking barn, dude. Just like, they're back there just talking to you. I'm like, every time I was talking to the listener, I turn around, I'm like, y'all are still talking, man? I'm like, Daniel, you ain't even at your booth. You left Jeremy high and dry, man. But no, that was super fun having everybody there, dude. And it was so busy, man. It was so busy. It was awesome seeing all you listeners that came to the show.
Yep.
I mean, untold number of you guys that came by the show and just hung out and talked deer stories. And some of y'all were willing enough to join us on the podcast, and we did a whole podcast episode specifically on listeners. and what some of you guys have learned from the podcast from different guests and different topics on the show. And it was fascinating because some of the guys have had tremendous success using things that they've learned from the show. Other guys are still trying to figure it out. And it was kind of cool getting that dynamic of like people with different backgrounds on the show and, you know, how it's impacted them directly or how they're like focusing on different aspects of the show and different things that they've learned from the show to then go out and use. And I'm telling you, my favorite story, I've told this story 1,000 times, I feel like, since the Expo.
Oh my gosh, you're like a broken record, man. I've heard this so many times. Dude, Jacob gave this spiel so many times at the Expo.
It is my favorite story of all times, and it's a kid named Tracy Brooks, 22 years old, listener to the podcast. And I'm sure, Tracy, you're probably listening to the podcast, probably going to be thrilled to be talking about you. But, dude, I appreciate him coming by the booth.
Yeah.
I've never met someone of his age that has gotten so into deer hunting in such a short amount of time and had the success he had.
Yeah, gotten good fast.
After using stuff in the podcast. So his story I'll mention on the podcast. At 20 years old, he's 22. At 20 years old, back in 2020, he's working with his boss, and his boss said, if you work with me all fall, you know, I'll take you deer hunting and let you shoot your first deer. And he did, and his boss took him to his hunting club and got his first deer. He shot a spike, or a 3-point, just, you know, a younger buck, and got kind of the itch to go hunting. So got a gun, got the whole 9 yards, and started hunting some permission properties in 2021. And he struggled, you know, he talked about he struggled, he didn't really find any success, really didn't see a whole bunch of deer. Well, at the beginning of 2022, at some point early in 2022, he had heard about the show, started listening to the show, and started really taking notes and applying what he was learning from the show, specifically on transition edges between those hardwoods and pines, and finding that secondary transition edge, that subtle transition edge that like guys like Greg Staggs in episode 129 talked about, where you're finding like these secondary like subtle train edges.
Yep.
Or habitat edges off a harder edge. And he started focusing on that, and he picked up a bow for the first time in 2022. His first year bow hunting, instead of hunting these permission properties, he started hunting public land. He hunted 6 different pieces of public land, if I remember the story correctly. He killed 8 deer with his bow on public land his very first year hunting public land. And then he shot 2 bucks with his rifle on public land as well.
Yeah. That's awesome.
He was 1 buck away from tagging out and just had a mishap with a bow and wasn't able to recover the buck. In his first year to the podcast, he's like, dude, everything I learned, it was from the podcast. Everything applied. And the crazy thing about it, like, that's a lot of deer. Like, especially like 8 deer with a bow. Like, dude, you're freaking on fire. He's like, I missed 13 or 15 other deer with the bow on top of the ones I killed. And I'm like, I can't. That is crazy, dude.
We were talking about that. I was like, that is a very high ratio of like how many times I'm assuming he hunted versus how many times when he went hunting that he got to shoot at a deer. I'm like, dude, you're getting a crack at one like every hunt.
One thing he said, and guys, you're going to want to listen to his interview because I interviewed him on this episode that's going to come out here in maybe a couple of weeks or a week or so. And he's on it, again, Tracy Brooks. And he talked about, he's like, it took him a lot of bow season. Like, it took him October into November before he started figuring out how to hunt those habitat edges. Mm-hmm. But when he figured it out, he's like, nearly every time I'd go in the woods, whether I went in blind or I scouted my way into a spot, if I sat there, I had an opportunity at a deer nearly every time I sat in the woods once I figured that out. And I'm like, dude, bro, rub some of that stuff off on me.
For real, man. Find that pattern and hammer down on it.
And he killed one. He killed 2 nice bucks last year, but one of them was a really good deer, like a really, really good buck, and especially on public land.
Oh yeah,
like just a great deer. And I'm like, dude, like. And one thing that was kind of impactful about him that I got really excited about is, you know, him talking about, he's like, you know, hopefully sometime in the future I can, you know, get skilled enough where maybe I could, you know, be a guest on the podcast. I'm like, dude, you are on that track. Like, we've had guests on the podcast that went from being a listener of the show and we started learning some things to actually applying it really successfully and actually became guests on the show.
Yeah.
One that, God, what is his name? My mind's going blank, from Arkansas. Aaron... Last name starts with R.
Rao.
Yep. He was one of them that I think we interviewed him last year, who kind of went from a listener to being a guest on the podcast.
Yep.
And
I had a guy at the Deer Expo from Georgia, Ben DeWitt. Ben, I'm sorry if I just pronounced your last name wrong. I'm pretty sure I got it right though. He was on the episode that's going to be coming out here soon, and he actually was a listener success story that he wrote in with, and it had posted. I scheduled it to post, and it dropped like the day before the expo or something. and he happened to be at the expo, and he came by. He's like, "Hey, man," and he told me his name, and I was like, "Oh yeah, yours just dropped," and we got to talking about how he killed this deer, and I interviewed him and everything, and we went over, how he was looking at like these little secondary ridge points coming off this pine thicket, and I had like this whole idea in my head of like what this looked like, and he's like, "Well, I'll just show you," and he pulled out his phone and he pulled up his OnX and showed me exactly where he shot this buck and what those secondary ridge points that he was hunting looked like, and it looked way different than I had in my head, but it was the kind of stuff that I struggle with in like just around here, like even when I'm hunting in Georgia, it was the kind of secondary ridge points where I'm like, is that really a ridge point?
Oh, it's a real subtle one.
Yeah, it was very subtle. And it was like a subtle pine edge too. It was one age pine meeting another age pine, and there was like a little pocket of pines, and he was hunting in that pocket. It was fascinating, and I was like, dude, I was grilling him, dude. I was like, okay, explain this to me, explain that to me, and I was picking up stuff from him and learning from him. So and that's one reason I was excited to do that episode, because when me and Ben essentially got the same information from whoever we interviewed. I was obviously on the podcast, and then Ben listened to it. We both got the same tidbit of information, and he went and applied it in a way different than I ended up applying it. And he ended up shooting a buck, and seems like he's really starting to get it figured out. So I'm like, well, what can I learn from you?
Yeah, absolutely. By the way, how many interviews do you think we did? Have you been able to look
probably around 15 or so?
Yeah.
I was copying them over a minute ago. It's definitely over 10.
How long is it?
I don't know. I haven't put them together yet.
Oh God.
I literally just copied all that off.
Interesting. Well, it's gonna be super interesting for everybody to kind of listen to and also watch. It's gonna be on YouTube as well. We filmed the whole thing, but just some of the different listeners' thought process on different topics and like what was impactful for them. It was all fascinating because there's some commonalities between them, and there's others that like really stood out as like, bringing up, like, one of the guys brought up that I interviewed, the episode we did with Tom Brownlee, episode 315, talking all about scent and like how that changed his perspective on entrance and exit routes when it comes to like breaking branches or like, stepping on a bunch of stuff where you're leaving a ton of ground scent and kind of like minimizing that. And that's kind of like paid off for him, where he's like trying to find exit routes where he can get in and out of stuff where he's not having to bust through a lot of things that it's going to leave a ton of ground scent. And I'm like, yeah, that's pretty fascinating as well. But
yep, definitely.
We got some new Q&As, by the way.
Oh, we got a bunch of new Q&As.
Long story short, guys, the Expo, World Deer Expo was an absolute blast. Next year, I'll say this, make sure if you're like in Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi, Tennessee, I would highly come next year, because next year we've got us, Michael Perry was sitting next to us. He had a booth right next to us this year.
Yep.
With his state record muzzler buck and all of his big deer. It's going to be us, Michael Perry, and Daniel Lemon and Jeremy Aaron all side by side with Do It Yourself Hunter. We're all going to be side by side next year in a very awesome spot. It kind of more towards the entrance of the building. So it's going to be, I'm so excited.
Yeah, it's a really good spot. I'm excited about it.
Yep.
All right, let's kick off these Q&As. So first up, Mike.
We're with the Q&As. How do people submit Q&As? Talk about this.
So to submit a Q&A, go to thesouthernoutdoorsman.com. There's a whole page called Listener Q&A, and it'll bring you to a little submission form. You go drop it in there, and we'll answer it on the show.
Yep. So absolutely have loved these Q&As, guys.
It's so fun.
We've had a lot of people write in. Again, you can go to the website, or maybe we can put a link in the show notes, put a little heat on you, put it in the show notes.
Oh, yeah. It's in the show notes. I already do that.
I was going to say, so you can go down to the show notes in the podcast episode, guys. So scroll down and you can look at it and just submit the Q&As. I love these things. And, like, we had some awesome feedback. I had some guys tell me, some listeners at the show, that they've been enjoying the Q&As as well. Because one of the guys, the guy who was talking about hunting Illinois, he came by.
Oh, yeah.
And he was like, dude, that was me, man. Like, it was crazy.
When I was like, you better tell me how you do up there.
He's like, man, my buddy called me, whatever, said, man, you won't listen to this week's episode. He's like, they name drop you at the end of it.
Oh, that's awesome.
Anyway.
All right, first up, Mike Damron, Damron. I think that's how you say that.
Damron.
Man, sorry if I'm getting these names wrong, man. All right. How would you hunt select cut pines with a saddle? There's no cover besides those small breakable limbs until you get too high to be able to shoot into the undergrowth. too high to be able to shoot.
I haven't had that issue in select cut pines necessarily. Typically, in my experience in select cut pines, the higher you get, the more shot opportunities you get.
Yeah.
Typically. Now his may have a lot more sapling understory.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like to me.
Which when I say more shot opportunities, I'm not talking about early season. Early season is rough. Select cut pines in October, even November in the deep south, are pretty miserable because the leaves haven't fallen off a lot of the saplings. A lot of saplings, at least where we're at, you're going to have some.
They're hanging on till mid-November.
Well, you're gonna have maples. You're gonna have some sweet gums, maybe some
poplars sometimes.
And typically a lot of those trees have pretty big leaves on them, those saplings. So like when you climb up in that stuff, like you can't shoot through it. Now, after it falls off, even with a bow, you can still have opportunities of shooting some of that stuff, and definitely with a rifle. Like sometimes in select cut pines, I've been in a spot where I shot a doe. It's on the YouTube channel. Shot a doe with my pistol, my handgun, on a management area hunt in Alabama on some public land, and I was in select cut pines that when you were on the ground, you literally could not see 10 yards. But when I got, I think I might have probably broke 30 feet in that pine tree I climbed up in the saddle. I could see down into it, and it made it look like it was wide open. Now, this was like later in the year. This is like in December, but when you got up that high, I could see for 150 yards into some of that stuff. And the further you get away, it's a little bit harder to kind of see into it. But anything within 60 yards of me, it looked like it was nearly wide open.
Yep.
Like when you get high enough up, you can like shoot past all those saplings. So you can do it bow hunting or with a gun hunt. With a gun. But what's your take on it?
It sounds to me like maybe there's not much undergrowth that he needs to see into. I don't know. Like I'm trying to picture like what this looks like, but basically, like the root of the question, like how would you hunt a select cut pine with a saddle, basically with no cover? That's like essentially what he's asking. Like, how do you conceal yourself?
I don't. But, so this is the advantage I think of like the saddle aspect in that. Now sometimes in the select cut pines, it's hard to figure out where the deer are coming from. Like they 360 degrees, kind of pulling a Carl Brown from last week's episode. You kind of get in the middle of some of that stuff, and maybe you find like a subtle ditch running through it that's got some thicker cover on it, something that potentially deer are going to work the edge up. But when you hunt in select cut pines, in my experience, I want to get as high as I can get, whether I'm using a climber, or whether I'm using sticks with a lock on or a saddle, or if I'm going to be one sticking, which we're going to do this year, and try to get as high as I feel comfortable shooting from, especially like if you're bow hunting. Like if you can break that 25 to 30 foot mark, I think you're doing pretty good. Like the shot angle is going to be pretty rough if it's inside 15 yards. But it seems like in select cut pines, especially if there's some kind of understory with like saplings, in my experience, the deer aren't typically looking up in that. Now, if it's wide open pines and there's no ground story, there's no saplings or anything, maybe they're a little more cautious about looking up. But if they've got stuff all in their face when they're walking through there, in my experience, I don't have deer very often look up in those situations. But what's your take?
Yeah, I mean, I would just do the best you can. I mean, in that kind of situation, you just have to, like, I like to look up at the canopy and like look at about how high I'm going to climb. So if I'm like getting 20 feet up, I'll look about 20 feet up in the pine and like, what's behind that pine tree? Like, is there just more canopies? Is it kind of broken where you can kind of see the sky through it and everything?
You can see a lot of the sky.
Yeah, you can see a lot of the sky. Because then if there's truly just no cover on the tree, then you're going to have to worry about back cover and like what's going to break up your outline. So if there's a deer trail and you think these deer are going to be working down this trail, you need to like look up at all these different trees you could possibly get in and look and see what's behind those trees in the background, and don't get in a spot where there's like a lot of daylight coming through where you're going to be kind of skylined. If there's like a taller cedar, back behind it, even if you're not within like 10 yards of that cedar, that cedar's maybe 10 yards behind you, but it's blocking that skyline, and so it just gives you something a little bit more solid to use as a backdrop for yourself. That's a good way to break up your outline, and that's about the best you can do in that situation. Like if you're limited on how high you can climb, you just have to look for decent back cover, and or get in a tree big enough that you can hide behind it if you're saddle hunting.
Yeah, and it depends on how big these pines are that he's in, but typically in those bigger select cut pines, when you start talking, I'm just gonna guess trees that are in like the 18-year, maybe not 50, 15 is a little young, but probably like 18. Like they're big enough. You put a climber on, and like you gotta stretch that cable out a little bit. I don't know, but probably 18 to 20-year-old pines, like almost to the age they're about to cut it. Like they do that last thinning when like they've done that thinning, and like probably the next time they go in there, they're clear cutting the whole thing.
Yep.
Those trees, like you said, Andrew, like, they're big enough where you can kind of hide behind it. Like, I'm still going to stick out from behind it. It's whatever. But the advantage, I feel
we're working on that.
Yeah.
We've been going to the gym.
Yep. The advantage, Andrew almost died this morning, by the way, guys, at the gym.
Yeah, it's actually true.
I almost had to take him to the ER.
He's like, all right, let's go to the ER. I was like, you're not taking me to the ER.
He couldn't hang with the fat guy doing the exact same workout as him. It's terrible. But anyway, that's a side.
I'm never going to live it down.
That's a side note. No, every time we're talking about it. Like, he might be skinnier than me, but dadgum, his heart's not in as good a shape as this fat kid.
Dude, I got a fat kid heart.
Yeah, but no. Also, an advantage I feel like with the saddle when you up there, because you're leaning at nearly a 45-degree angle, maybe like 30-degree angle off that tree. I've had does look up at me, like that doe I shot with the pistol, big old doe, okay, and had a fawn with her. She came in from behind me, and I know for a fact when she stopped at about 15 yards from me, she looked right up at me, and I just froze. I didn't even look at her. I just froze until I heard her start walking again. And the second I heard her start walking again, she was coming to my left, coming up behind me to my left, kind of at my 8 o'clock position. Kind of like started peeking my head over, looking down at her. And when I saw she wasn't looking up at me, drew the gun off the chest holster, spun around and shot her. It's, again, a lot harder if you're talking about trying to grab your rifle that's hanging on the side of the tree or grabbing your bow that's hanging on the side of the tree. But, I mean, you just got to do what you can in that situation. But,
By the way, something kind of funny about, like, how high you're getting up. I went over to my mom and stepdad's house, and me and Mike were in the front yard. Mike's my stepdad. We were in the front yard practicing like climbing and stuff because he just got his first climber. I just got the one stick.
Mm-hmm. Whoa! You didn't get a one stick. You're borrowing my one stick.
So I'm bumming Jacob's one stick.
Clarify. There you go.
Yeah. So I'm practicing with that because I just got the little gree thing to rappel with out of the tree. Mike's up in his climber, and Mike throws the climber on the tree, and he starts climbing up, and we're talking, and I'm standing on the ground, like kind of walking him through it and everything. And I'm like, yeah, a lot of people, like they think that they are getting way higher in the tree than they really are. And I'm standing like 20 yards from him. I'm like, because when you get up there, like your vantage point changes so much, you feel like you're taller than you are. And I was like, how high up do you think you are right now? He's like, I mean, probably at least 18 or 20 feet. And like from my perspective, like I kind of giggled. I was like, I thought he was joking at first. And I was like, 18 or 20? He's like, yeah. And so I walked over there and grabbed the bottom of his platform with my hand.
Really?
Yeah.
That's hilarious.
I was like, but hey, that's just an example. Like, especially someone who's newer like him, you think you're way higher in the tree. Now, like when you're standing on top of that platform, sure, you're like a little bit, closer to that height, and it's not quite as egregious, but still, like it can be very deceiving. Like, very deceiving. I'm like, you'll hear a lot of guys who are like, I was 35 feet up. I'm like, they were probably 18 feet. Mm-hmm. Like, legitimately. They were like 25 max.
Yeah, I always say this.
If you ain't adjusting that platform.
If you're in climber, if you're not adjusting that platform a couple times, that's just not the case. Or, also, if you're carrying a 30-foot pull-up rope and there's slack on the ground, you're not at 30 feet.
Yeah.
And it's like typically like you're going to go on those spots. Like I kind of go back to that spot I was in South Alabama where I filmed that buck come by me. And I had to tie 2 30-foot pull ropes, and I measured to the platform roughly like at 43 feet. And I think I had to adjust that platform and the top 4 times on the way up that pine tree.
Yep.
But like I had a deer at 35, 40 yards come by me. And when I show people the video, they're like, "Oh my god, dude!" Like freaking out. Like
it looks silly.
Yeah, like you couldn't like if you try to shoot a deer with a bow at that height, like I don't know how you'd spine the deer.
Yep.
Like there's no way to get a double lung at that height bow hunting. But anyway,
we're gonna do 2 more Q&As because I think we're gonna have to kind of punt this one. But this one is from Tyler Jones. He says, Jonathan Moreland mentioned several times in y'all's most recent episode, he's referring to the round table, about hunting the right lunar phase. He also mentioned not hunting evenings or mornings due to certain lunar phases. Could y'all go more in depth with what this means? He also mentioned not hunting evenings or mornings due to certain lunar phases. So
I don't think he said that statement, did he? I don't think he said not hunt a morning based off
Dude.
He's like, I'm hunting whenever I can. He's like, if it lines up, it lines up, but I'm not going hunting. So maybe he's talking about Jeremy. I know Jeremy talked about it. Like Jeremy specifically mentioned a couple times that like, if I have enough time to hunt, he's like, if it doesn't line up, I'm not going in the woods. But Jonathan did. I don't think Jonathan made that statement. I think Jonathan, if I remember,
I'd have to go back and listen.
Yeah, I'm almost certain Jonathan had mentioned that.
I think you're right.
Yeah, Jonathan's like, I'm going to hunt when I can because I don't have a ton of time to hunt. If it lines up, great. But if it doesn't line up, I'm still going to the woods.
Yeah. Let's see.
What was the name of that guy again?
Tyler Jones.
Okay, well, this last guy? Who's the last one we got?
No, next one. So I'm trying to think with Tyler's question, right? Lunar Faith. Do we have an episode where we kind of go in depth on?
Yep.
Do you remember what it is?
Yep, I'll look it up.
Is it with who is it with?
Bill
Vale?
Yep.
All right, you look up that episode real quick. I'm gonna go ahead and go to the next question, and we're gonna circle back to that one here in a minute. All right, this is the last one. This is a great question. This is from Adam Reeves. Hey guys, I love y'all's podcast, and I listen to every episode on the way to and from work. We appreciate that. Had a tough year last year, having encounters with 2 great bucks, but just couldn't finish the deal. What would be your number one tip for getting over the tip of the iceberg from just being on the deer to actually killing a good deer? I feel like I got a lot to say on this one.
I was a little distracted.
You zoned out?
I don't remember. Can you repeat for me? What was the guy's name again?
Adam Reeves.
Adam, we're giving you a shout out. There you go.
So he said basically, what's your number one tip? He saw 2 good bucks last year but couldn't finish the deal. Mm-hmm. What's your number one tip for getting over the tip of the iceberg from just being on the deer to actually killing a good deer?
Shooting quicker.
I mean, true. I'd be curious about the situation.
Are you bow hunting?
That happened.
Yeah, so listen, if you're going to submit more listener success stories, or not listeners, I'm sorry, Q&As, give us as much details as possible. Like, if you're in that situation, are you bow hunting? Are you gun hunting? Are you hunting with a muzzleloader? Like, give us a little bit more background. Like, it gives a better idea.
Well, so, I mean, regardless, though, of, like, the background here, we did an episode with Bobby Worthington that covers this, like, very specifically. And I think that is, like, preparing for the kill itself, you know. We did that episode with Bobby, and he was talking about how like, meticulous and how in-depth he goes with when he's setting up a tree stand about where his shooting lanes are going to be, how the wind, like what the deer is able to see when he's coming in. I think he might have even said something about like kind of like checkpoints. He's like, when the deer gets right here, I'm going to be doing this. When the deer gets right here, I'm going to be doing that. When the deer gets right here, I'm going to draw. You know, and he's setting up his hunt as though like he knows exactly what that deer is going to do with confidence. And also ties into something that has actually helped me, and it's not something that we talked about on our show, but it's something I heard Cody DeQuisto talk about one time. And that is, he's like, I think he was saying he used to set up where there's like 3 different trails and he's kind of getting in the middle where he could potentially shoot each one. And he's like, now I've changed to where I'm hunting one trail and I'm setting myself up absolutely perfectly for that one trail. And that's something that's cost me a bunch of good deer in the past is I'm choosing a mediocre setup. So, cause I'm getting kind of greedy cause I'm like, well, I might be able to shoot that or that or that. And I don't really have a great shot at any of them. And I let a deer get past me, or I don't have a good enough shot, you know, and I can't take a shot, or I hit a limb or something because I didn't give myself enough of a shooting window. So like confidence in your setup and setting up like you're going to kill something. Have the confidence that like something's going to walk down this trail, so I need to be in the absolute perfect position to, you know, kill that thing.
This guy's last name is Reeves, right?
Yes.
Okay, so Reeves is the episode I'd go back and listen to, and for all listeners out there that's really relative to this. It's episode 297. Title is Closing the Deal with Bobby Worthington. And he goes in great detail, kind of like what we're talking about here, about his thought process on setting up his spots when he goes out and hunts. So, like, he has that opportunity. He goes through, like, this mental checklist of how he execute when he bow hunts. And I think it's super valuable, whether you're gun hunting or bow hunting, taking some really good information out of that. You know, like you said, I think another thing is sometimes you only get one opportunity with those deer.
Yep.
So it's like if he gets by you, especially during the rut, there might not be another chance he's going to come back by the next day. He might be a mile and a half from you on a different doe group. And it goes back to another episode we did with Jim Forbes from Virginia, where he's like, when you get that opportunity, you do everything in your power and get an opportunity to shoot that deer, whether you're gun hunting, bow hunting.
Yep.
When you get the first ethical shot. He talked about he keeps a journal of all the deer he's killed and all the conditions, all that kind of stuff. And probably ought to do another episode with him about that.
Yeah.
But
that's one that's overdue.
Yeah. But he talked about, he's like, I average from the time I see that mature buck to the time I shoot him, and he's a big gun hunter, doesn't really bow hunt anymore, it's 5 seconds.
Yep.
It is a 5-second window between when I lay eyes on him and when I get my gun up and take a shot opportunity. And I think that's a huge point. Is so many. It's cost me some deer where I try to wait for a better shot with the rifle, and maybe he's broadside, he's quartering too, something like that. But maybe there's a limb I need to kind of lean around or something like that. It's 30 yards in front of me, the deer's at 60 yards. But getting that first good shot opportunity at that deer, you're gonna kill more deer. Michael Parrish says the same thing. First good shot opportunity I get, I'm taking it. I'm not waiting for a better shot opportunity to potentially present itself, or that deer to walk directly away from me, or run, or spook, or whatever. And I think that's huge, because there's a deer that goes back. He would have been, if I would have killed this deer, it would have been one of the biggest bucks. Well, as of right now, it'd be my biggest buck I've ever killed in Alabama if I would have killed him. And it was on our family farm, and it was a deer. He was walking, and I thought I could stop him at 100 yards, and I felt comfortable taking the shot, but I didn't stop him. I got too worked up in the situation. He just worked through this giant opening right on the edge of these thick pines, and it was just a really big 9-point. Probably he was in that. When I say real big for this area, he was in probably the upper 120s. He might have broke 130 as a 9-point, and just didn't execute the shot, didn't execute the opportunity that was given to me. And that kind of comes to knowing your equipment, knowing what you're physically capable of, because if you're not capable of taking a shot like that or anything, you have more things working against you. But I think that's a huge point. Now bow hunting, I feel like another thing that's cost me that I can bring up is not being fully aware of what's happening around you while bow hunting. Not so much gun hunting, but bow hunting, where you don't hear that deer coming in until he's 20 yards from you, and you're pinned at that point. You're I can't make a move. If I try to make a move, I'm going to get busted. Had a deer in Arkansas 2 years ago, hunting the mountains. Actually, I called in, did a grunt sequence after we interviewed Richard Fott, and had 2 bucks come in behind me. One was a really, 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 really good 8-point. At 25 yards, I was hunting with a muzzleloader, and I was looking in the opposite direction. He came in directly behind me, kind of with a crosswind. And by the time I could spin around the tree, he busted me. And I wasn't aware of the surroundings, and also thinking about, based off the habitat I'm in, where's that deer going to come from? Well, more than likely, he's probably going to come through the thick cover behind me instead of the more open side of the ridge in front of me. So I should have already been looking that way, and I didn't, and it cost me a deer. So I think that's huge, is being aware of your surroundings and your setup, whether you're gun hunting, bow hunting, hunting with a muzzleloader, and truly thinking, especially if you're calling, or if you're in an area maybe during the rut or something, and you don't necessarily know where the deer's coming from, more than likely he's going to come from the thickest cover closest to you. If he's going to be coming, if you're in a really good pinch point, so pay attention to that. If that's behind you, you might want to spin around a little bit so you can watch that section and watch that area.
Yep, definitely. Also, there's something to be said about just having experience killing deer. I don't know where he is on that path or whatever, but we talk about guys in the Midwest. It's kind of crazy how different they are when it comes to killing bucks. A guy who's been hunting for a long time, they only get 1 buck a year.
In some of those states, yeah.
Yeah, in some of those states. And so he's maybe only killed 8 bucks or something over a year, a long period of time. And meanwhile, you can have guys down here who are shooting 3 bucks a year, and that killing experience pays off. And but even though it's even different though for big really big deer and just deer. There's definitely a lot of translation there. If you just go out and hammer a lot of deer, like that listener from the show who killed 8 last year, that's awesome. That's gonna help him when a huge deer comes out in front of him. He's gonna have that experience. But at the same time, there's something to be said too about you're just gonna have to get those deer in front of you and screw up on them. I mean, I'm a perfect example of that.
Tell us about that.
So so in my life, I'm in the 40s in deer, which for a guy my age, that's a pretty good amount of deer to have killed like over the course of your life or whatever. And last year, I'm so confident. I've killed like 40 some odd deer with a rifle, or just in general, and like I don't know how many with a rifle. Like probably at least 35 of those have been with a rifle. Mm-hmm. And so like with the rifle, dude, I'm like perhaps overconfident, And then last year, dude, that big buck, for years I've just done good, but that really big deer stepped out, and I mean, I freaking whiffed. Like it was my first day in the woods, dude. So that just goes to show that, like, even though you had all that killing experience, when it was a moment of truth on like a deer, like I don't have a lot of experience with that kind of deer in front of me.
Yeah.
Now I do. I have a little bit more experience, so on the next one, I don't do that. And the next day I ended up shooting that buck. Yeah. But yeah, killing experience, man. Like I don't know how much you have, because like I'm just going off what's in the Q&A, but if you've only killed like a couple deer, like I'd go on a little bit of a tear, dude. And I'd lay the woods with some does or something this year too. And that's also how you work on what you're talking about, like getting a shot off quick. Just whatever the situation calls for. Yeah, and a dynamic range of situations.
And this is different. We're not talking about hunting on a food plot where they're coming out there and they're spending some time there. We're talking about when you're in the timber, maybe you're on a feed tree or something like that. But like typically, if you're not on a feed tree and it's just a transition area, it's a travel corridor, you have a short window of time that deer is going to be walking through, easing through your spot. And it's not like you're in necessarily a complete wide open area where you get tons of shot opportunities. So like the first, like when you see the deer, this is one thing that I pay attention to. I think a lot of listeners probably pay attention to this, but some maybe don't. When that buck comes in, especially, or if you're trying to kill a doe, it's not just watching that buck or watching that doe that you're trying to kill, especially if it's maybe not at your range, like say you're bow hunting or something like that, but looking ahead of where they're walking for 20 yards ahead of them and like, okay, where's my next shot opportunity? Where's my next shot opportunity?
Yep.
And not just getting so fixated on the animal that like you just keep watching it and you kind of miss like, oh, there's a huge opening coming, but you don't see it because you're watching the deer, and by the time he's in the opening, you're not prepared to take the shot. And I think that's huge as well, about when you see that buck, like my mountain buck I killed last year, that the big 6-point, that real old deer. When he came out on that doe, he was in some crazy thick stuff. I mean, all I could see was his like antlers and the top of his head and his eyes. And as he's walking, kind of quartering up towards me, I'm looking 30, 40 yards ahead of him, if he can get there, of where I should have a shot opportunity. Like, I'm looking ahead where that deer should come to based off how he's walking now. And then I'm watching the deer, I'm looking back ahead and kind of lining everything up so I kind of know what hole is he probably going to come out to that I can get ready for him. And then as he's coming into that spot, whether it's with your bow or with your gun, you already have that area kind of picked out. And a great example that you did this and executed really well, one of your bow bucks you killed a couple years ago, that's filmed on the YouTube channel, killed him on a pine edge, and crazy thick.
Oh, yeah.
And I think you probably did the same thing where, like, hey, you had to pick one window, and it's about the size of, like, a saucer plate. Probably, I don't know, maybe 10 inches wide. It wasn't huge that you shot into. Where that buck was coming around the edge of that pine thicket, he was in the edge of the pine thicket. He was in the pine.
Yeah, he was like 12 yards in the pine thicket.
But when he was walking through, like, you couldn't shoot him for a long portion, but like you had to pick that spot he was about to walk into, and before he even got there, you were drawn back, settled on that spot, and then when he stepped out there, you freaking let it rip, and freaking he didn't make it very far.
Yeah. If you watch that video too, I actually hit a limb on the way to him and like cut some leaves off, like you can see him fall and everything. Yeah. But yeah, no, that's a really good point though, about like kind of watching out in front of that deer. And that's another thing, like going back to my stepdad Mike, where I took him on his first squirrel hunts this last year, and we were out squirrel hunting, and you have a squirrel timbering or running around, or we had one that was in this one oak tree, and it was doing its thing. What they'll typically do is they'll run up the tree and they'll run down a limb, and they'll be looking for a ripe hickory nut or whatever. Like if they're in a hickory tree, they'll be looking for like a ripe nut, and they're gonna like pluck it off, and they're gonna run somewhere else, and they're gonna sit there and eat it for a minute. And sometimes when they're looking for a nut, they'll like be running all over the tree, and they're just kind of all over the place. Well, we were like we had stalked right up underneath this thing, and we were looking up, and it was running around, and Mike had the gun up, and he was kind of aimed, and he was looking down the barrel of the gun, and he'd be like trying to aim and like find the squirrel at the same time, and the squirrel would be like over here now, and I'm like, no, it's over there, and we were like having to look around and everything, and like it made me realize like that again, like the inexperience of that, like knowing how to like kind of calm down and like look for the game and like what it's gonna do and adjust quickly. Again, that's another way that squirrel hunting helps with that. But I'm like, hey, like, I mean, this squirrel didn't know we were there. It was just doing its thing. But I was like, hey, like, lower the gun. Like, don't shoulder the gun until you're about to, like, kill the squirrel. Like, watch it. Watch what it's doing. See where it's going. And when you see it's about to run through that open limb, throw up, get on that limb, let him run into it and kill him, you know. And we ended up killing the squirrel. But it's the exact same thing with a deer. Like, you gotta read the body language of the animal and see where it's going and kind of, you know, stay out ahead of it and be ready to take the first opportunity that you got. Because that's another way I got burned a couple years ago. Is I had a decent opportunity. You know, it was
clear cut buck.
Yeah, it was. I was using gear I was unfamiliar with. Wasn't super confident with it, so I didn't know exactly like what I could get away with this gun. And looking back, I definitely could have killed this deer. And he walked through an opening where there was just a little bit of brush, something that I would have not thought twice about with a rifle. But I'm using a muzzleloader. Never used a muzzleloader before. And so he was walking towards this, I mean, just wide open opening. And I let him get through that first gap thinking he just had to walk 5 more feet and he'd be in that wide open spot. And he didn't. You know, he ended up turning and going back in the thicket. And so I literally just let him walk right through my opening, you know. And that goes to show that when they give you an opportunity, you better take it. Yeah. You know, and that goes into what like Jim and some of those other guys, Michael Perry says that a lot. Like, dude, you take the first shot that you get, the first decent shot you get, you better take it.
Well, I'll tell you this, it almost not necessarily almost cost me, but it got a little sketchy on the SOA buck that I shot because I did not do that. I let him get through quite a few really good openings, but I wanted, and it's getting a little selfish, I wanted really good footage of the deer because I knew I knew where you were at and kind of how you were shooting like the camera past me, and you were kind of behind a tree. So I'm like I can shoot him here, but I don't think he's gonna be on camera. And it's like I can see him good, but I'm pretty sure Angel can't see him. Like I'm just gonna keep letting him walk, and I let if you weren't there, I would have shot the deer way, way, way sooner, like 75 yards sooner of where he walked. But,
man, I was filming that. I was like, well, hell, I guess he's passing it.
Well, I kept letting him go. And again, this is what not to do, guys, especially, you know, if you're not filming and everything. But again, I had an opportunity to shoot him way sooner, but I let him walk to the point, like, he gets like 50 yards of us, and he's walking at a decent pace. He's not trotting or anything, but he's walking at a good pace. Like, he knows where that hot doe had just come through like an hour and a half previously, and he was going that direction. And I thought he was going to get on this pretty good opening in the grass, and come to find out, he's all behind the grass. And I'm like, oh crap, if I
come to find out that grass is like 7 feet tall.
And I'm like, if I don't shoot him here, like, I'm not going to get a shot, because I knew what was, again, because I'd been paying attention, what was on the other side of the grass, and it was a lot more trees and timber and stuff like that, and like a bunch of saplings. I'm like, if he gets past this grass, I'm not going to be able to shoot the deer. So I stopped him in the grass, drawn down to right where his shoulder is, pulled the trigger, went through the grass, friggin' hit him. And he didn't make it 60 yards and went down. But, yeah, that is so critical. Like, you've got to be so aware of your surroundings, not only, like, listening and looking for deer, but also when he comes in or she comes in and you're looking for that shot angle, you got to be looking out ahead of that deer of, like, where's your opening is going to be, where's your shot opportunity is going to be, and execute when you get to that shot opportunity, the first shot opportunity you get.
Yep, absolutely. All right, we got a review to read. I'm going to let you do it.
Okay.
So, here you go.
Top one?
Yep.
All right, so this is from this is a review, guys, on Apple Podcasts. Appreciate everybody helping us out on Apple Podcasts. I know a lot of you guys listen on Apple products. If you enjoy the podcast, not only share the podcast with a buddy, but also go to Apple Podcasts, leave us a 5-star written review, and we try to read off all the new reviews as they come in. So currently we're sitting at 1,025 reviews. So this just came in. This is from Reality Video Man, is his name on here. Title: Love the podcast, 5 stars. Love the podcast and listen weekly. It's great to hear from Southern hunters, since so many podcasts seem geared towards the Midwest hunter. Nothing wrong with that, but it's not the same tactics as here. What's green to grain? I don't really know what that means, but and it was some laughing emojis afterwards. And then below it says, Jacob knows how to talk fast too, with a smiley face, which I definitely do talk extremely
Jacob
fast.
definitely does know how to talk fast.
Yep. But gotta get all your words in, man.
Yeah,
So
that's right.
But anyways, appreciate that review, guys. So again, if you enjoy the podcast, you can go leave us a 5-star written review on Apple Podcasts. Greatly appreciate it. I know some of y'all listen on Spotify. You can leave us a 5-star review of that. Unfortunately, they do not allow written reviews. But you can again sign into your Apple account, sign that in, and also, guys, come up with some creative names. Again, we're still waiting on Big Buck Nuts and Little Buck Nuts, which are 2 longtime reviewers, to give us another review. But appreciate that. And also, guys, appreciate everybody been watching the podcast or who has been watching the podcast on YouTube. It's been awesome kind of see that grow, seeing the engagement, seeing some of the questions coming in from YouTube. So maybe at some point we might start reading some of those questions that come in from some of the YouTube videos.
Yep.
Kind of pull like a little Andy Frisella dude.
Yep.
But other than that, I'm trying to think, is there anything else going on?
Oh, I think by the time this drops, it's the month of August, which means it is the month that deer season kicks off for us.
Yep.
So, I mean, dude, I don't know about you, but this summer has just absolutely screamed by for me. It has been, it's been nonstop, dude. Between like the expos and all kinds of stuff that we got going on, summer's gone by really fast, which I appreciate. So it's about time to actually start hitting the woods, man. I'm excited. I'm excited to start getting some more listener success stories rolling in. We've actually had some roll in from last year that people just didn't send in until like a couple weeks ago. Mm-hmm. But I've got several a week dropping until the end of August still, and I still have some left over. So y'all keep dropping them in our inbox. That's another thing. You can go to the southernoutdoorsman.com. There's a whole page for listener success right there. You go drop in a picture of your deer and a brief summary of how your hunt went and what you learned from the podcast that helped you out, and we will post that. And it is very helpful to people, and it's really fun for us to get to see that. So make sure you write in with those because we love seeing them. We also got some turkey ones in there that people have sent. So I'm kind of hanging on to those.
Yeah, we're going to save those for the springtime. Also, I just talked to one of our buddies, John Ball from Cache River Leather. I think we're going to do some kind of like monthly giveaways for listener success stories come this fall.
Really?
Yeah.
With John?
Yeah, and also I'm going to try to talk to a couple other companies that might want to get on the action. So, listeners, there is some incentive. Not only go kill you a good buck because it's fun and it's awesome, and it's cool when you kill the big buck in your friend group. But also, there's going to be an incentive to write in those listener success stories because I think we're going to do monthly drawings. Probably, if I had to guess, probably starting in October and run it through maybe going into February. Cool. Doing some monthly drawings based off, I think how we're going to structure, we're going to figure out some details. We might pick our top 5 favorite ones based off storyline and everything, and then we might put it up for the listeners and followers to vote on social media and kind of get some feedback there between which ones they like the best.
That'd be kind of fun.
Mm-hmm.
That'd be really fun. Cool. You got anything else?
No, appreciate it, guys, joining us. Appreciate y'all watching on YouTube. And, guys, we'll catch you back here for next Monday's episode from the Southern Outdoorsman Podcast.